Everyone in Anchorage told him never to wander too deep into the woods, and now he finally understands why. A lonely veteran in a red and black buffalo-plaid flannel sought peace in a small cabin far from town. But on the coldest night of winter, his loyal German shepherd began growling at something hiding beyond the tree line. Moments later, glowing eyes emerged from the darkness, and a wounded wolf pup collapsed at his doorstep. What the veteran did next would challenge nature itself, and what the pack revealed would change his life forever. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments. It's always inspiring to see how far these journeys reach. A silent winter storm pressed down on Anchorage snow, drifting like pale whispers between the trees. Thomas Carter, a man whose back had bent under the weight of wars long ended, but never forgotten, pushed open the creaking door of his remote wooden cabin. At 70, he still carried the rugged build of a soldier, broad-shouldered, though time had softened his strength. Deep wrinkles traced along his weather-beaten face like frozen rivers, and a grisly beard streaked with silver framed a jaw that once clenched through battle commands. His piercing gray eyes, clouded slightly with age, still burned with a stubborn will to survive. Yet behind that fire lay a silent exhaustion only those who had seen too much could understand. Draped over his shoulders, as always, was his thick red and black buffalo-plaid flannel jacket. It had followed him from base to base, from battlefield to hospital ward, and now into this lonely exile he chose to call peace. At his side trotted Dakota, a German shepherd with powerful muscles beneath thick tan and black fur, 3 years old, and fiercely loyal. The dog had eyes like warm amber, full of awareness and gentle protectiveness. Thomas found Dakota abandoned near a VA clinic in Fairbanks 2 winters ago, a pup left behind by someone who could no longer care for him. The memory of lifting the trembling creature into his truck had etched a rare softness into Thomas's heart, one of the few pieces not yet hardened by grief. Outside, the world felt endless and empty. Evergreens coated with white stood like silent guardians. The air bit at their faces, a cold so deep it could freeze memories before they formed. And perhaps that was why Thomas had chosen Anchorage's outskirts, to freeze the memories he didn't want anymore. Every breath he exhaled became a small ghost that vanished before he could chase it. Today they walked deeper into the woods than usual, Dakota bounding ahead, nose buried in the snow. Thomas followed, his old boots crunching in a slow rhythm that echoed loneliness. "Don't wander too far, partner," he murmured, his voice low and husky from decades of cigarettes he quit too late. Dakota barked once, as if promising he'd never leave. For a moment warmth flickered in Thomas's chest, but peace, he knew, rarely lasted. He knelt to gather dry branches for firewood when Dakota suddenly froze. His tail stiffened, ears pointed toward a narrow clearing where the wind carved shifting paths in the snow. Thomas stood upright, muscles tightening. He had learned long ago that danger always arrived quietly. "Dakota?" he asked, heart thudding with old instincts. The dog led him forward, nose twitching, eyes sharp. There, etched into the untouched whiteness, were paw prints. Not the round, gentle marks of domestic dogs. These were long, deep, powerful. Wolves. Thomas stared at them, a chill rising beneath his coat that had nothing to do with the weather. Wolves weren't uncommon here, but these were fresh. Too fresh. A soft breeze carried the faint scent of wildness, feral hunger wrapped in fur and teeth. Dakota growled low and protective, standing slightly ahead, as if he were Thomas's shield. "Easy," Thomas whispered, laying a hand on the dog's strong back. Inside a storm he tried so hard to bury began to stir. Wolves were only animals, he reminded himself, not enemies. Not like the ones from the deserts across the ocean, whose shadows returned every night in his dreams. Still, the unease remained. He followed the tracks a bit farther until they vanished into thick brush. The forest beyond felt darker than usual, like a throat ready to swallow anything that dared enter. Thomas cleared his throat, attempting humor the way lonely men often do. "Looks like we've got new neighbors," he said to Dakota. "Ones that don't ask to borrow sugar." Dakota didn't laugh. Instead, he nudged closer, sensing the fear Thomas refused to admit. The veteran forced a chuckle anyway, pretending the cold was what made his hands tremble. They turned back toward the cabin sky, dimming into early twilight. The sun in Alaska didn't linger long in winter, another reminder that life here was meant to be endured, not enjoyed. When they reached home, Thomas set the wood beside the fireplace and lit a flame. The crackling warmth pulled shadows back into their corners. Dakota circled his bed, a worn wool blanket Thomas had folded near the fire, and settled down with a sigh. Thomas sat in his old rocking chair, the wood groaning beneath him. He removed his gloves, staring at his hands. Scarred knuckles, fingers stiff with arthritis. These were the hands that once saved lives, or so the medals claimed. He closed his eyes, but the memories never asked permission to return. A helicopter exploding in fire. Screams. Sand turning black. Young men he swore he would bring home. A lone heartbeat in a silent tent. His heartbeat. The guilt was a parasite that refused to die. Dakota whined, sensing his master's thoughts. Thomas leaned forward and scratched the dog's ears. "You're right," he muttered, letting out a breath. "We're safe here." He wanted to believe it. Outside, the wind howled long distant, almost like a wolf's mournful cry. Dakota stood again, fur bristling, his amber eyes fixed on the window. Thomas followed his gaze. In the darkness beyond the glass, something glimmered faintly. Two glowing points low to the ground, watching. Thomas blinked, and they vanished. Silence returned, but a new weight pressed into the cabin's air, a feeling of being observed. Thomas rubbed his beard, mind racing with caution, sharpened by war. "Probably just my imagination," he muttered, but he didn't believe himself. Dakota paced restlessly, nose to the floor near the door. Thomas knew better than to ignore his dog's instincts. He stood checking the latch twice, then loaded an extra bullet into the rifle resting near the wall. He didn't want trouble, but trouble didn't need permission to come calling. He stared at the fire, its flames dancing like restless spirits. He had come here seeking quiet, thinking the wilderness would let him disappear into peace. Instead, he felt more exposed than ever, like the snow itself was stripping away all his defenses. He whispered to the empty room as Dakota curled protectively beside his boots. "Let's hope those neighbors keep their distance." But something deep inside him, the same instinct that once pulled him from burning wreckage, whispered that this winter held more than snow and silence. It held secrets, and tonight was only the beginning of a story Thomas had never expected to live. Night fell like a heavy curtain, smothering the final traces of daylight that clung desperately to the snow-laden treetops. The wind picked up again and howled through the forest like some ancient spirit calling out for the lost and forgotten. Thomas Carter sat in his old rocking chair, with Dakota at his feet, both staring into the crackling fireplace as if its warmth alone could shield them from the darkness pressing up against the windows. But the fire could not silence the world outside. Dakota stiffened first, his ears pricked nose lifting toward the bottom of the cabin door. A low rumble vibrated in his chest, not loud, but a clear warning. Thomas followed his gaze, dread slithering into his veins. He stood up slowly, every joint protesting the sudden movement. He peeked out the window, pushing aside the thin curtain with trembling fingers. The darkness stared back, cold and patient. And then he saw them. Golden gleams suspended in the night. Not one pair of eyes, but many. They reflected moonlight, with eerie intelligence shifting through the shadows like sparks floating on black water. A pack. A big one. Wolves. Thomas's heart tightened. He'd lived in wild places long enough to understand that animals didn't stare like that unless they were testing boundaries. Dakota moved closer to the door, fur bristling along his spine, his protective instinct fully awakened. Thomas gently placed a hand on his head, hoping to calm him, but also grounding himself in the dog's presence. At least he muttered with a dry attempt at humor, "They brought a warmer welcome than this damned snow." But Dakota's body told another story. This wasn't a curiosity or a casual visit. The dog trembled ever so slightly, breath quick and sharp. Danger was near closer than Thomas wanted to admit. He locked the latch on the door again, even though he knew flimsy wood couldn't stop a desperate pack. He reached for the old rifle, leaning by the wall, the familiar weight bringing back the reflexes of a soldier who never truly retired. "We'll just let them know we're not easy prey," he whispered. He peeked through the small window again, and this time he spotted more than eyes. A massive wolf, likely the alpha, stood ahead of the others. Its fur was a silver-gray coat thick enough to battle the harshest Alaskan storms. Muscles rippled beneath its stance, one paw slightly forward, as if claiming the land it stood upon. Its gaze was intense, not vicious, but assessing like a commander measuring an opponent. Thomas recognized that look. He had worn that same expression once under a very different sky. The wolves shifted, circling the cabin, but never stepping closer than a certain unseen boundary. It was as if they were testing the invisible line between curiosity and conflict. The wind died for a moment, and in that silence Thomas could hear the crunch of snow under their paws. Too quiet. Too coordinated. These were apex survivors of the wilderness, not mindless predators. Hours passed with neither side making a move. Finally, the wolves slipped back into the night, eyes disappearing one by one behind the white trees. Thomas exhaled slowly, unaware he had been holding his breath. Dakota stayed tense, staring at the door long after the threat had vanished. "Yeah," Thomas murmured, rubbing his dog's back. "I don't think they were here just to say hello." He threw another log on the fire and tried to sit back down, but sleep felt like a gamble he wasn't willing to take. Instead, he kept watch, his body alert, but his mind drifting into dangerous territory. Echoes of gunfire, a guttural scream in the desert. The knowledge that sometimes you didn't get warnings, only consequences. Hours later, Dakota nudged him. Not alarmed, but insistent. The dog padded toward the kitchen window, nails tapping against the old wooden floor. Thomas followed, squinting through the frost-rimmed glass. A figure cloaked in white from head to toe staggered near the tree line. Not a wolf, not human-shaped enough to be comforting. Something in between. It moved weakly, collapsing halfway to the cabin. A small whine pierced the air. Dakota barked once, sharp tail straight. Thomas grabbed his coat and hat. He hesitated, fear and instinct wrestling inside him, one screaming to stay put, the other reminding him that a soldier doesn't abandon the wounded. He strapped on thick boots and opened the door, letting a blast of cold slap him hard enough to steal his breath. Dakota bounded ahead, paws sinking into deep snow, nose guiding him to the fallen creature. When Thomas reached them, his breath caught. A wolf pup, barely too young to survive alone. Its fur of smoky gray was matted with blood on one hind leg. Ice clung to its eyelashes like crystal tears. The pup whimpered and tried to crawl away, terrified. Thomas knelt slowly, careful not to provoke more fear, and studied the injury. A metal trap wound, jagged, brutal. Someone had set traps on his land. The realization ignited anger hotter than any fire inside the cabin. He removed his glove and extended his hand, fingers steady despite the cold. "Easy there," he whispered. "We're not here to hurt you." Dakota stood close, chest puffed and stance protective, but his eyes softened a silent approval of Thomas's choice. After cautious moments, the pup went limp from exhaustion rather than trust. Thomas wrapped it inside his flannel jacket and carried it to the cabin. Back inside, he laid the pup near the hearth and began cleaning the wound. The animal whimpered but didn't fight, too weak to do anything but endure. Thomas worked with surprising gentleness, whispering assurances he barely believed himself. "You're tough, little guy. You'll make it. We've all survived worse." The irony stung. He wasn't sure he still believed in survival, not in the way it used to matter. Dakota watched closely, nose inches from the pup, curiosity and concern intertwined. When the pup finally drifted into uneasy sleep, Thomas covered it with a blanket and sat back staring into the fire once more. "They're going to come back," he said aloud, mostly to Dakota. The dog's ears perked a silent agreement. Wolves protect their own. And now a wounded pup lay inside his cabin. The unspoken truth chilled Thomas more than the wind outside. Tonight the wolves had come only to warn him. Next time they might come to reclaim what was theirs. And in a world as cold and unforgiving as this one, loyalty could turn into danger with the speed of a heartbeat. Morning arrived quietly, though the cold was harsher than any night before. The sun barely offered a pale glow behind dense gray clouds, as if the sky itself feared to shine upon what lurked inside the woods. Thomas Carter rubbed his tired eyes, feeling the weight of a sleepless night pressing on his bones. His cabin still smelled faintly of antiseptic and wolf fur, and Dakota paced steadily near the small bundle asleep on the blanket by the fire. The wolf pup, fragile and breathing unevenly, looked more like a shadow than a creature of the wild. Thomas knelt beside it again, checking the bandage on its leg. The wound was deep, still angry and red beneath the cloth, but at least the bleeding had slowed. The pup opened its eyes, storm gray, the same shade as the alpha's gaze from last night, and whimpered softly. The sound pierced something soft inside Thomas, a part of him he thought the war had killed long ago. He reached a steady hand to gently pat its head, something cautious but kind. "You're tougher than you look," he murmured, a thread of admiration weaving into his voice. Dakota watched tail low, unsure whether this new presence was a burden or a friend in the making. Thomas chuckled dryly, sensing the dog's unspoken frustration. Yeah, he said, adjusting his flannel jacket. "I know we didn't sign up for this." His voice softened. "But we didn't leave anyone behind before. That was the code." Dakota's ears twitched, as if understanding the deeper confession, one that even Thomas rarely voiced. Duty didn't end where the uniform did. It haunted him, shaping his every action even now. The radio crackled, suddenly static, whispering into the room. Thomas jumped slightly, nerves frayed. He hadn't heard a broadcast in days. The storm had drowned all signals. A distorted voice tried to break through. Snow warnings, road blocked, missing, 2 hikers, last seen North Ridge. Then silence. Thomas frowned, turning the knob until the static swelled again, but the voice was gone. "Great," he muttered. "Now it's not just wolves in trouble." Dakota barked once, as if asking whether they would go searching. Thomas placed his rifle on the table while glancing back at the fragile creature near the fire. "One crisis at a time, partner." He took a deep breath and filled a small bowl with leftover venison stew, thick broth and meat softened enough for the pup to eat. The pup sniffed, then ate timidly, hunger slowly overpowering fear. Thomas watched with a quiet satisfaction. Saving something, even something wild and teeth-baring, gave him a purpose he hadn't felt in years. Still, he knew nothing in nature came without consequence. Outside, snow fell heavier, blanketing the cabin in icy silence. He stepped out onto the porch, letting the frigid air bite into his lungs. The tracks from last night, not just the wolves, but others were visible deeper in the woods. He narrowed his eyes. Snowshoe prints. Large boot prints. Human. Someone had come close to his property before the wolves did, maybe the same person who set the traps. A scowl formed beneath his beard. Men were often more dangerous than animals. Dakota came to stand beside him, pressing against his leg like a living anchor. "We'll keep watch," Thomas said, but his thoughts drifted back to the endless conflict between violence and compassion raging inside him. He had spent his early life trained to defend by destroying. Now he just wanted to heal what he could. After taking a final look around, he stepped back inside. The pup whimpered again, struggling to sit upright before collapsing into the blanket. Its thin shoulders shook with cold. Thomas stoked the fire and dimmed the cabin's lamps, letting the warmth glow like a cradle around all three of them. Night crept in early, swallowing daylight, without mercy. Fat flakes of snow tapped against the window, like timid knocks from a world that never cared whether a man lived or died. Thomas lit a single lantern and sat closer to the fire, Dakota curled protectively at his side. He took out a polished silver dog tag from his pocket, his own engraved with a name he sometimes wished he didn't remember. Carter Thomas E. Blood had stained that metal once, long before the frost ever touched it. He closed his fist around it, eyes burning with memories of faces and voices lost in foreign sand. "I promised I'd protect my unit," he whispered, "and I failed too many." Dakota nudged his knee, grounding him again in the present. The pup whimpered louder this time, a sound filled with fear and longing. Thomas scooted closer, settling the young wolf gently into his lap. He covered it further with his jacket and stroked its head with incredible gentleness for a man with hands made for war. "No one's dying tonight," he vowed, the firelight gleaming in his eyes like a renewed oath. "Not on my watch." A soft knock suddenly rattled the door. Thomas froze. That sound didn't belong to wind or wolves. Dakota leapt up, growling deep from his chest, body tense and ready to spring. Thomas's pulse hammered in his ears. He placed the pup down and reached for the rifle, every muscle remembering a lifetime of reaching for weapons faster than thought. He didn't turn on lights. Instead, he moved silently toward the peephole, the old soldier's instincts guiding his every breath. A silhouette stood outside. A person bundled in thick winter clothing, heavy coat dusted in snow, fur-lined hood pulled low. Thomas's hand tightened around the rifle, and he cracked the door open just enough for his voice to escape. "You lost?" he asked sharply. The stranger lifted a gloved hand to remove her hood. A woman. Her face was pale from cold, cheeks flushed a painful red. Wisps of wavy brown hair clung to her forehead, and deep hazel eyes, full of desperation, met his with no hesitation. She looked young, perhaps mid-30s, though fatigue and fear aged her features. Her body was tall and slender beneath the thick clothing, hands trembling violently, not from fear alone, but likely from exhaustion. "Please," she gasped. "Help us." Her voice cracked as if each word cost something precious. Behind her, another figure slumped to the ground, unconscious. A man, maybe early 40s, with a sturdy build weighed down by heavy snow gear. His face was half hidden by a wool scarf soaked through, but Thomas noticed thick eyebrows and dark hair poking out beneath his beanie. When the woman struggled to lift him, Thomas could see she was too weak to stand much longer. Dakota barked once, confused and anxious. Thomas's instincts tore in different directions. He had a wounded wolf pup inside. Now 2 strangers at his doorstep, human lives depending on him. This was the kind of moment that defined what remained of him. Inside, he ordered quickly, pushing the door wider. "Hurry!" The woman nearly collapsed, dragging the man in. Thomas caught him beneath the arms, surprised by the solid weight and the icy chill seeping through the man's jacket. Together they laid him near the fire. The woman stumbled beside him, ripping off her gloves to check his pulse, her hands shaking so badly she could barely keep them steady. Thomas knelt beside them, checking the man's breathing. Shallow, but present. Frostbite nipped at his ears and fingers. "Who are you?" Thomas asked, voice steady but guarded. The woman tried to answer, but her teeth chattered violently. He hurried to wrap a large blanket around her shoulders. "Save the introductions for when you're warm." The pup stirred softly, Dakota barking in protest as Thomas focused on the strangers. The once quiet refuge was now the center of two emergencies colliding. Thomas swallowed hard, already feeling fate tightening around him like a snare. The wolves would return. The storm would worsen. The humans needed shelter. The pup needed protection. And Thomas Carter, a man once trained to choose who lives, now had to save everyone under his roof. "We're in this together now," he murmured almost to himself. The fire crackled in agreement, sparks rising like promises into the air. The cabin's walls groaned under the rising storm as night thickened into something almost alive. Firelight flickered against rough wooden planks, casting long shadows that danced like silent soldiers keeping uneasy watch. Thomas Carter stood near the strangers he had just dragged from death's edge, one asleep, one weak, but awake, yet his attention was fixed on the door, where Dakota paced urgently. The dog's instincts buzzed like a live wire. The storm outside no longer masked what stalked beyond the glass. Danger had returned. Thomas took a slow breath, gripping his rifle not out of aggression, but resolve. A soldier's hands never forgot purpose. The woman he had rescued, her breathing steadier, now pushed her hood back fully. In the warmth, her true features emerged. Her name was Emily Reeves, she said, voice soft but resilient. A wildlife photographer originally from Portland, she had driven north seeking a rare shot of the aurora across the Alaskan night sky. Her hair, though tangled from the blizzard, fell in rich brown waves around a thin, angular face. She had high cheekbones, eyes wide with both intelligence and a fear she fought to hide. Beneath her nerves lay a stubborn courage, the kind carved from witnessing nature's beauty and brutality alike. The unconscious man was her older brother, Michael Reeves. Tall and sturdily built under his gear, he bore the rugged look of a man used to physical challenge. Though his eyes remained shut, his hands were rough and scarred, hinting at a life of hard work. Emily explained he was a field biologist, fascinated by wolves. That fascination had led them too deep into the wilderness. "We were tracking a pack," Emily whispered as steam from her mug of warmed snow water curled into the air. Michael thought one of the wolves might be injured. He didn't want to leave it behind. Her gaze drifted to the wolf pup resting by the fire. A painful realization hit her. That must be the one. Thomas exchanged a look with Dakota. The pieces were aligning in a way he didn't yet trust. Before he could ask more, Dakota growled loud, sharp, a sound that prickled the skin. The dog stood rigid at the door, fur-fluffed tail raised. Thomas moved toward the window and pushed the curtain aside. Eyes, golden eyes, several pairs glimmering through the storm like embers caught in wind. "They're back," he breathed, feeling the old battle-ready adrenaline surge through his veins like thawing blood. Emily's face drained of color. "The pack. They followed us." Thomas unlocked the rifle safety. "They're wolves." "Of course they did." Dakota pushed his muzzle against the door, not in fear, but readiness, loyal and protective to his core. Emily stood shakily, worry trembling through her hands. "You're not going out there alone," she said, though terror cracked her voice. Thomas didn't have time to argue. The wolves crept closer, silhouettes rising from the snow, large bodies, powerful limbs, eyes glowing with instinctual claim. The alpha emerged into full view, larger than Thomas remembered from the night before. Its fur, thick and silver like a storm cloud, glistened under the moonlight. Its sharp posture spoke of dominance but not recklessness. The pack lined up behind their leader in eerie order. Thomas opened the door just enough to step out, Dakota bursting forth to stand guard. Icy wind seized them instantly, ripping warmth from exposed skin, stabbing claws of frost into Thomas's lungs with every breath. Snow crunched beneath his boots like shattered glass. The alpha wolf stepped forward, low growl echoing through the trees like the pulse of the wild itself. Dakota's snarl answered, teeth bared in fierce defense. "Easy, boy," Thomas murmured, though his knees shook from cold and tension. This moment was a knife edge between fight and fragile trust. The wolf pup whimpered weakly from inside the cabin, hearing its family outside. Thomas looked back through the cracked door. Emily knelt beside the pup, holding it close but eyes wide with terror. He nodded once to her, a silent reassurance, and reached down to carefully lift the injured pup in his arms. Dakota shifted anxiously, but didn't block him. Stepping forward, Thomas placed the pup gently in the snow, halfway between the cabin and the alpha. His breath fogged heavily, floating away like fragile dreams fading into night. "Go on, little fella," he whispered. "Your family's here." The pup wobbled, tried to stand, then collapsed into the blanket of white, a soft cry escaping its throat. The alpha approached slowly. Every muscle in Thomas tensed, Dakota low to the ground, ready to spring. But then something unexpected. The alpha dipped its head. In gratitude, not aggression. It nudged the pup delicately with its muzzle, guiding it upright. One by one, the other wolves lowered themselves as well. Submission. Respect. Recognition of the man who saved one of their own. Thomas stood tall, shoulders squared against the cold, and met the alpha's stare. Soldier to commander. Protector to protector. In that silent exchange, a treaty was forged, not signed in ink, nor sealed in bloodshed, but acknowledged by instinct and necessity. The alpha gave a final low huff, then nudged the pup toward the pack. When the pup whimpered in pain, Thomas almost moved to help, but he stopped himself. This was nature's part now, not his. The wolves turned. Their bodies melted back into the storm, the pup supported tenderly between two strong siblings. Thomas exhaled shakily, his heart pounding with fierce relief. Dakota licked Thomas's hand, a rare tremor passing through the dog's strong body. "We did good," Thomas murmured, placing his cold hand over Dakota's head. "We did really damn good." Inside, Emily watched with an expression that blended awe and disbelief. She opened the door wider as Thomas and Dakota stepped back in. Snow clung to their boots and fur, like a final reminder of the thin line they had walked. "You saved them," Emily said, her voice soft but full of emotion. Thomas shook his head, though pride flickered in his tired eyes. "Maybe they saved us too." But peace rarely lasted long in places where survival ruled. Michael stirred suddenly, eyes opening wide, wild panic erupting as he gasped for air. "Emily, wolves! They found the den!" Thomas and Emily rushed to his side. Michael's voice cracked as memories rushed back. "It wasn't an accident. That trap, they weren't meant to catch animals." Emily went pale. "What do you mean?" Michael's gaze locked on Thomas, the fear in his eyes colder than any blizzard. "Someone's hunting them." The first hint of dawn seeped through the frost-rimmed window, a faint stroke of rose-gold light brushing the treetops beyond the cabin. It wasn't warmth, not truly, but it was a small promise that the night had passed, and sometimes that promise was enough. Thomas Carter stood by the fireplace as the flames settled into glowing embers. He rolled his shoulders slowly beneath his thick red and black buffalo plaid flannel jacket, feeling every winter and every war etched into his bones. Dakota lay close to him, resting his massive head atop his paws, though his amber eyes were wide awake, still listening, still guarding. The wolf pup was gone now, returned to its family with the fragile hope of survival. The imprint of its tiny form remained in the blankets by the fire like a memory, refusing to fade. For the first time in years, Thomas felt something he'd nearly forgotten, pride unburdened by guilt. An old soldier might still have use, he muttered to Dakota, scratching the dog's thick fur. Dakota huffed softly, as if agreeing. Emily Reeves sat at the cabin table sipping heated snowmelt, her hands wrapped around the cup, as if it were the last warm thing left in the world. Exhaustion still clung to her face, but her hazel eyes held a newfound steadiness. She wore a simple gray thermal shirt that hung a bit loose on her slender frame, the sleeves pushed up slightly to reveal faint scars along her forearms, thin marks that hinted at past struggles with rough terrain and harsher wildlife. Her wavy brown hair had dried and now framed her face with a delicate, unintentional grace. "I saw what you did," she whispered, her voice carrying a weight far deeper than the words themselves. Most people would have kept the pup, or left it to fend for itself. Thomas shrugged, turning toward the window, so she wouldn't notice the flicker of emotion in his eyes. "You don't survive long by betraying trust out here," he replied. "Even trust from a creature with sharp teeth." Michael Reeves, her older brother, lay wrapped in blankets on the couch, color slowly returning to his cheeks. As a wildlife biologist, he had always been sturdy and capable, but frostbite and dehydration had pushed him to a dangerous edge. Now his eyelids fluttered open, revealing deep-set brown eyes that reflected both intelligence and fear. He had a square jaw and a thick stubble that darkened his face, giving him the look of a man always a breath away from confrontation. Survival had shaped him into someone who questioned everything, even rescue. Did the wolves come back? Michael croaked, his voice strained but urgent. Thomas nodded once. "You're safe now. They've taken the pup." Michael swallowed hard, sitting up with effort. "That's good." But his tone was not relief, it was dread. Emily reached out to steady him, brushing melting snow from his jacket. "Michael, you need to rest," she urged. He shook his head stubbornly. "No. He needs to know." He pointed weakly toward Thomas. Confusion rippled through the cabin. Thomas leaned against the table, rifle still within reach, watching the man carefully. "Know what?" Michael inhaled sharply, anxiety constricting each breath. "It wasn't a trap set for the wolves," he said. "It was bait. Someone is targeting the pack on purpose." Thomas's grip on the edge of the table tightened. "Poachers worse." Michael rasped. "This is organized. Someone wants them wiped out completely. Not for sport. Not by accident. Something bigger." Emily's eyes widened with fear. "Michael, I heard them," he pushed on. "Men talking near the cliffs. They were tracking the Alpha specifically. They said the pack has been interfering with their operations." Thomas frowned. "What kind of operations?" Michael hesitated, his teeth catching his lower lip as if trying to hold back the truth. Dakota suddenly shot to his feet, ears sharp, hackles raised. A low growl rolled from his throat. Thomas turned instinctively toward the window. Snow began falling again, heavier, swirling in chaotic spirals that blurred the world outside. But through that blinding white haze, Thomas saw them, fresh boot prints appearing along the tree line. not the wandering tracks of hikers. These were purposeful, straight, calculated, leading toward the cabin. His heart smacked against his ribs with renewed urgency. "We've been found," Thomas muttered. Emily clutched the blanket closer to her chest, fear crawling up her throat. "Who are they?" Thomas checked his rifle out of habit. The familiar metal steadied his pulse. "People who hunt what doesn't belong to them," he said quietly. Dakota snarled at the door as muffled voices cut through the wind, 2, maybe 3 men. Heavy steps. Confident. The kind of confidence that carried the stink of cruelty. Michael struggled upright despite Emily's attempts to keep him down. "Thomas," he said, voice cracking with desperation, "they won't just walk away. They saw me following the pack. If they think I talked—" Thomas didn't need the rest of that sentence. His jaw clenched. Blood rushed through him, the same blood that had pushed him through war zones, the same blood that now demanded he protect his home and the lives inside it. He turned off the lantern, plunging the cabin into warm shadows lit only by the fireplace's glow. Dakota's growl deepened, a thunderous warning of violence ready to unleash. Thomas whispered, voice low but fierce, "No one comes through that door unless we let them." Emily scurried to help Michael sit upright behind the couch, shielding him from direct sight. Her breathing trembled, but her hands were steady, courage taking over instinct. Thomas positioned himself near the window, rifle raised, but not yet pointed. Through a sliver between curtain threads, he saw movement, dark jackets, rugged boots, the unnerving gleam of metal weapons. One of the men stepped forward, his broad shoulders and arrogance leading the way. He wore a thick camo parka hood down, revealing a shaved head and a jaw lined with coarse stubble. His skin was rugged pale from cold, but hardened by a life of dominance and violence. His name would soon be revealed as Jack Rourke, a notorious poacher once rumored to have ties with illegal wildlife trades in the Yukon. Jack lifted a hand, signaling silence to the others. His eyes were sharp blue like frozen steel, scanning the cabin, as if he already owned everything inside. Thomas recognized that kind of man, the kind who acted like the world was prey beneath his boot. Jack smirked slightly, then banged loudly on the door once, twice. The sound echoed like a hammer striking bone. "Morning," he called out, voice too cheerful to be anything but cruel. "We're looking for a wolf pup. Thought it might have limped this way." Thomas didn't answer. Silence was its own message. Jack chuckled, a mocking, delighted noise. "Come on, old-timer. We both know you've got it. Let's talk about making this easy." Dakota's growl surged into a bark of rage. Thomas placed a hand on the dog's neck, not to silence but to promise action. He leaned forward slightly, voice deep, and edged with steel sharpened by decades of survival. "We don't have what you want," Thomas said. "Time to move on." Jack laughed, a short, hideous burst. "See, that's where you're dead wrong." He motioned with his hand, and his men fanned out, closing in. Thomas's pulse roared in his ears. He had faced enemies before, but this time he wasn't the only life on the line. Emily held her breath. Michael tried not to collapse. Dakota braced for violence. And the sun outside, so newly risen, seemed to hesitate on the horizon, unsure whether this day would bring hope or bloodshed. Thomas knew one thing clearly: the wolves were gone, but he remained. And what he loved, whether man or beast, he would protect. Whatever it cost him, in the quiet of the frozen wilderness, Thomas learned a powerful truth: every act of compassion, no matter how small, can become a miracle in someone else's life. Sometimes God works through our hands, through our courage, and through the love we choose to give. The wolf pup survived not by chance, but because grace found a way into a soldier's heart. And that same grace can appear in our everyday lives when we choose kindness over fear, protection over harm, and hope over despair. So as you finish this story, take a moment to look around your own life. Ask yourself, where is God calling me to be the miracle today? If this message touched you, share it with someone who needs a little light. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing this community grow across the world. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, loyalty, and the extraordinary love God places in even the coldest places. May the Lord bless you and protect you. May He watch over you and all those you love tonight and always. Amen.